We are live here on the Fantasy Fanatics MMA podcast. I am James Lynch. He is JHK. JHK, what's up, man? How you doing?
Good, man. Same old day, just a different number.
Exactly. Well, we're a little bit more enthusiastic than that. This is a great fight we're going to be talking about here today. If you guys haven't watched the show before, basically we'll be answering your questions, and we're also going to be focusing on an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, we're going to be looking at the Cody Garbrandt and Rob Font fight, which is going to be taking place on May 22nd. I wanted to give an early preview of that. Before we dig into that, though, little housekeeping. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We will be answering questions, but that'll be after we do the full breakdown. And want to remind everyone to download the Fantasy Fanatics MMA app. It's great. I put my picks on there last week. I think my UFC picks were actually pretty good last week overall, minus a few fights, but I got the main event right. There's a few others. So the great thing about this app is that you can go head to head with us. You can see what our picks are, and it's very interactive, and it is the best app in the game right now. So make sure you download that Fantasy Fanatics MMA app. It's great. Just can't say enough good things about it.
And who's ranked number one?
Is it you?
Yes, I'm ranked number one.
There you go.
I just need to brag.
You just had to slide that in there.
I just need to brag while I'm on top, because that fall could be deadly, right? In a couple of weeks. Who knows?
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, well, let's dig into it here. We can pull up the graphic now, producer Michael, if you want. We got Cody Garbrandt taking on Rob Font. I was just telling you this off camera, John, that I can't believe sorry, I got that mixed up actually. Cody Garbrandt's ranked number 4. I was reading the wrong thing off air, so I didn't make that mistake there. So it'll be number 3 against number 4. So it's Rob Font is ranked number 3, Cody Garbrandt ranked number 4. I guess that makes sense. I'm a little surprised to see Garbrandt as high as he is, because prior to beating Assunção, he'd lost 3 in a row. So I guess you can put him there since he's a former champion. But big fight. I mean, everyone's focused, and we talked about it last week, the Dillashaw and Sandhagen fight. This fight's right behind, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some weird stuff that happens that maybe you see, maybe even the winner of this getting into the title picture. Of course, we know now, I don't know if this happened or we had the news last week, but obviously Aljamain Sterling going under the knife, so he's going to be out for a while. So do they do an interim title? Do they make Jan wait for that rematch? We'll see what happens. But either way, kind of what I'm setting up here for everyone, this is a big fight for the bantamweight division, and it's a tale of two different situations. You've got Cody Garbrandt, who won his last fight in highlight reel fashion over Rafael Assunção. Is he back? I mean, he had a really rough stretch where he was getting finished a number of times. And then you got Rob Font, who'd kind of been very inconsistent in his career. He had some setbacks, lost to Pedro Munoz, lost to a few other fighters, but that last win over Marlon Moraes really earned him this spot. So why don't we talk first, John, about the implications of this fight and how we got here?
Yeah, Rob Font, after he got the win in his last fight and he was ranked number 3, I knew in my mind, I just got this inclination that he was going to get a massive name. And Cody Garbrandt, I believe I interviewed Rob Font after the fight, and he told me that he was in discussions for a fight, and Cody Garbrandt was one of the names that he brought up. And then lo and behold, a couple days later, they announced the main event for this, for the show, and it's Cody Garbrandt versus Rob Font. It makes sense to me,
Mm-hmm.
Cody Garbrandt, he is a big name. Rob Font needs a big name on his resume to kind of shoot him up and kind of, to be honest, earn that number 3 spot. A little better. Earn that number 3 spot a little better. And I feel like this is a win-win situation for Rob Font, and really for Cody Garbrandt, it's just kind of like he's battling to keep his position. And I agree with you. I don't think he's number 4 in the rankings, man. There's a lot of guys that should be ranked ahead of him.
I think Aldo would beat him. I mean, you just look at some of the guys that are ranked below him in that division. You got even like a guy like Pedro Munoz who beat Garbrandt is behind him, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I know Munoz lost to Sterling and Edgar. I mean, the Edgar fight, I think he won, but nonetheless, that's how we are in terms of the rankings and all that. But yeah, it's certainly very interesting. And you're right. It is kind of interesting because Garbrandt's a former champ, had the losing streak, but then Rob Font also, you look at his wins, they're not really great wins, other than Moraes, right? Ricky Simon, not ranked. Ricky Simone's a good fighter, but is he that top tier? No, not really. And then you've got the win over Sergio Pettis, who's a flyweight. I mean, he is fighting bantamweight in Bellator. He's actually fighting for their title coming up here pretty soon, but not as good of a win as some of the wins that Garbrandt has had. So I will give him that. But that's sort of the optics of the fight as we usually sort of set this up. But let's get to the tail of the tape here. Let's get the two fighter names up here. So Cody Garbrandt, 29 years old, 5'8" with a 65.5-inch reach. We've got also Rob Font, who is 33 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5 inch reach. So like he usually is, John, Rob Font going to have a bit of a reach advantage in this fight. He's a pretty big bantamweight. That is one thing we should make note of, is that Rob is, a bigger bantamweight. I've been around Rob. He's a pretty big guy for the weight class. Cody talked about going to flyweight, and I remember when I heard that, I was like, wow, that doesn't seem like a good idea. But talking to people at Team Alpha Male that train with him, Cody is pretty light. Like, he could make the 125 limit. So I actually think that's an advantage for Rob, because I think Rob's a guy that could potentially even fight at featherweight, just with how tall and long he is, right, for the division. So, we'll see if that plays a role in the fight here. You look at the records there, 18-4, 12-3. It's tough to gauge those losses to Dillashaw, right? Because was he using, was he not? I mean, it's tough to say where Garbrandt is, but the one thing we do know, John, is that Garbrandt's taken a lot of damage, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you look at not only the losses to Dillashaw, but he also got knocked out by Pedro Munoz, who, if you're looking at it, Munoz not really known as a guy to finish fights early. So that was a pretty devastating loss for Garbrandt as well. With Font, it's been these mental lapses in certain performances. The Munoz fight where he got submitted in the first round. But outside of that, he's been very tough to finish. Just the one stoppage loss. By the way, did you know Rob Font fought Des Green in his second pro fight, the lightweight, which is kind of interesting. Totally went off on a tangent there. Didn't mean to do that. But kind of what I'm getting at is Rob Font's very durable, and Rob Font has not taken the damage that Cody Garbrandt's taken in his career. So we'll have to factor that in this fight as well. But in terms of Garbrandt, I mentioned it there. Lost 3 of 4. Coming off the win over Asuncao. Asuncau's not an easy guy to finish, but he did so in the second round. But I think we can all agree there that Asuncao not really the same fighter he used to be. There was a point where Asuncao looked like he was going to get a title shot, and it's just been, setback after setback since then. He does have the win over Dominic Cruz, which, yes, it was back in December of 2016, but that was a masterful performance. If that Cody shows up against Rob Font, he's got a very good chance of winning this fight. So we know what Garbrandt's going to do in this fight. He's going to try and keep the standing. He's going to try and strike, but that comes at a price. Like I said, he has been knocked out a couple times. He has taken a lot of damage. So we'll see the game plan here for Cody Garbrandt. Another quick note as well is that obviously with Garbrandt, not just training at Team Alpha Male, doing some work over there with Mark Henry over there in New Jersey. So will that pay off? It was something that he did leading into the Asuncao fight. So we'll see if that makes sense. But that's sort of everything on Cody Garbrandt's end. What do you think, John, in terms of Cody Garbrandt in this fight and his experience, and obviously having that championship pedigree in the past is going to benefit him in this fight?
Yeah, I think that's a big factor in this one. The spotlight, right? Cody Garbrandt's been in the spotlight multiple times over, and Rob Font, I believe this is his first main event, man. This is his first marquee fight. You know what I mean? How is he going to handle that? How is he going to handle the pressures of that? The pressures of like having a title shot maybe in his grasp, right? And facing a guy with devastating knockout power. That's what interests me the most, man. Will Rob Font step up to the plate and deliver? Cody Garbrandt, we've seen him deliver, but the big question for me with Cody Garbrandt is the COVID. Mm-hmm. He's been battling that COVID, right? And I'm just thinking, like, how is that going to affect him? And also, on top of that, he was about to go down to flyweight, like you mentioned earlier. Was he cutting weight? You know what I mean? Was he cutting weight throughout that time too? And then now he's got to put the weight back on. I don't know the whole situation around Cody Garbrandt, but man, there's a lot of questions with Cody Garbrandt in this fight. You know what I mean? It's just, to me, Rob Font, is he going to be able to come through in the spotlight? And Cody Garbrandt, is he going to be the same Cody Garbrandt, right? Is he going to be the guy that knocked out Asuncao, or is he going to be a shell of himself because of COVID, man? It's like, what effects? Did you dig deeper into that? Did you know like what?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you reminded me about that. I did see the interview he had, and he talked about some of the struggles, and that's part of the reason why he hasn't been in the cage for so long, because of the fact he's still dealing with these symptoms. So you never know. I mean, again, COVID's affected everyone differently. In his case, we'll have to see what he looks like in the fight. By the way, if you didn't see the odds there that popped up on the screen, Rob Font is the favorite right now. Cody Garbrandt the underdog, which I find a little interesting, but at the same time, like. I mean, I don't want to spoil. Well, I will spoil it. I am going to be picking Rob Font in this fight, but we'll get into it a little bit later. But I understand where the odds are coming from, and I'll sort of get into that as well. So that's everything on sort of Cody Garbrandt's end. Again, former champion. His biggest win by far is the Cruz win, which was a fight where I think it was one of the first times where we've seen Cruz in a fight where, I mean, outside of him losing to Cejudo, where Cruz decisively lost. Like the Dillashaw fight was close. Some of those other fights were close that Cruz has had. Other than him finishing Mizugaki, but it was the first time where like Cruz had decisively lost a fight, and you can't ignore that. And yes, it was 2016, but still, obviously that was a very big win there. So, like we said, the positives for Garbrandt are the fact that he's a former champ. He's been in that championship, type mentality, type experience, and all that. Obviously has some good wins, like I mentioned, the Cruz win. I mean, Cody has better wins than Rob does overall. And then the other thing is, yeah, like I said, just that knockout power as well. I mean, I would think if we're looking at power here, I would give the edge to Cody Garbrandt as well. The cons, obviously, been knocked out a bunch of times, COVID, inactive. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons not to like Cody. So those are sort of the pros and cons of Cody Garbrandt. Let's dig into Rob Font a little bit here. One of the things you talked about was, this being the first main event for him. And I think this is long overdue for Rob. He's been putting in the work. I do wonder, too, with him being so close to Calvin Kattar and Calvin getting that opportunity with Max Holloway in the main event, to do that walk. I've talked to fighters about this. They say it's very beneficial. I even talked to guys that aren't even in the UFC, and just getting to go through that whole experience, it sort of is a learning tool for them. So for Rob to be able to go through that with Calvin, and yeah, I know the result wasn't what Calvin wanted, obviously, but to go through that and be in that experience of being a main event, I think that's got to benefit Rob a little bit as well. So Rob, like we mentioned, a little bit older, but is going to have the height and reach advantage in this fight. Had a really good win over Marlon Moraes. And what was more impressive about that win, that was Rob's first fight since having some knee surgery. So the fact that he came back and made a statement like that, very, a big win for Rob Font in that regard, and obviously earned him this fight as well. Rob's good everywhere. He's got good ground game. He's got obviously good stand-up as well. Remember, he had that submission win over Douglas Andrade a couple of years ago. So we know the ground game's there as well. Tyson Chartier, I mean, we've talked to him I don't know how many times. One of the best coaches in the game. Tyson literally is a guy with, a big notepad. And, the second they get fights, they start going through it and start digging into it a little bit deeper. So he's going to be well coached ahead of this fight. He's getting good looks. I know he's been training a bit with Mitch Raposo, who we now found out is going to be on The Ultimate Fighter. Mitch is, we'll see him in the UFC someday. I'm pretty sure, whether it's through The Ultimate Fighter or not. Mitch is super talented. Rob's getting a lot of good looks. So that's another thing as well. And Rob's not doing a lot of traveling, right? He's keeping everything close to home, getting the work in he can. I know he's working a bit with Kattar. I know Kattar's sort of in and out of the gym, not back to full-time training. So that actually may be a disadvantage for Rob heading into this fight. He's not going to have Calvin at full potential. At least from the last time I talked to him was about a month ago. Calvin was not in the gym regularly. Will that ramp up close to fight time? You would hope so, but it depends on where Kattar's health is right now. So your thoughts on Rob Font as he takes on this big fight?
Yeah, Rob Font, like you said, he's good everywhere. I feel like Rob Font has more ways to win compared to Cody Garbrandt, right? The reach advantage is going to be something that's going to play out well with him if it does stay on the feet. He's like you said, he's submitted guys. What I mean, he can scramble, he can wrestle, he's taller, and something that really shines about him is he's never been knocked out. What I mean? He's never been knocked out, right? So he has a good chin, and he's faced some hard hitters in the past. Even his last fight, right? Marlon, he was cracked a few times in that fight, and he didn't go down. So, I think that's going to play a big factor too, is his chin, his reach, and I think Cody's going to go in there and try to stand with them, of course. I don't think there's a secret to what Cody's going to do. We've seen it multiple times over. Even though we want him to change, it just doesn't seem like he's changing. But Rob Font, he's evolved in front of us. And I think that's something big that we've seen from him. I love that Rob Font is changing, evolving, and his striking is much more diverse. When you look at the striking, like I pointed out, his reach is longer, but his striking is more diverse. He's not trying to sit there and box with you the whole time. He's kicking, he's kneeing, he's elbowing. And I think that's going to play major against Cody Garbrandt.
The other thing with Rob that we should point out, he's had a couple gaps in his career. If you remember when he signed with the UFC, he had that fight against George Roop. And then it took about almost 2 years off. He fought, I think it was July 2014, then did not fight again until January of 2016. So had a gap there, and then obviously had a gap last year, which I actually in some ways think is a bit of an advantage. It allowed Rob to get better, just like we saw in the last fight, right? And then we talked about obviously the knee surgery and then him being off for a year as well. I do want to emphasize that Rob has not taken a lot of damage in his career. And I think that is very important when we're talking about this fight, because if they do decide to stand and trade, who's going to be more durable? It's going to be the guy who doesn't take as many shots and the guy who gets to spar with Calvin Kattar all the time too. So, I mean, that's another thing to sort of be mindful in this fight is the lack of wars, so to speak, that Rob Font's been in. Cody's been in plenty. And I know he's had a lot of quick finishes as well, but he's been hit to get hit or to hit to get hit or however you say it. But you understand what I'm getting at is that like Cody's taken, he's been more sort of firefights and things of that nature. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. Okay. Might as well get to the pick. I kind of spoiled mine, but where are you going on this one, man? Because it's a very interesting matchup. The odds are close. How do you see this fight playing out?
Man, when I look at Cody and I think like, man, I think he's training with Mark Henry and more. I think now he's training more with Mark Henry, but I feel like he's at Team Alpha Male too. I think he's splitting his time. I wish he would go in there and wrestle, because when you look at Rob Font and you look at his last 4 fights, he's been taken down every single fight. Even he was taken down by Sergio Pettis, who's not a wrestler, right? He was taken down by a Sun Sal. He was taken down by Ricky Simone 6 times. And in his last fight, he was taken down twice. So, like, if Cody would go there and wrestle him, because we know Cody can wrestle, right? And he has the speed to do it. I think it would be a good fight for Cody, but that's not what's going to happen. I think Cody's going to go there. He's going to get hit once, and he's just going to be like, what? Where am I? I'm in the octagon. Let's go bang. And Rob's going to bang with him. I think if Rob goes in there and draws him into a firefight, I think Rob has enough power and diversity, and he has that reach to where he could clip Cody and knock him out. I think it could happen early in the fight, and that's why I'm going with Rob. I think Rob is on this trajectory. If you look at the last 5 fights, Rob is 4-1. Cody is 2-3, and he's been knocked out 3 times. I think the 4th knockout is going to come.
Also, there was the Sunset matchup was by design. Rafael Sunset, how many knockout wins does this guy have? Barely any. I don't think he. I think maybe he had the one over. It was Matthew Lopez, right? Who I mean, it was one of those fights where he needed an opponent. Matthew Lopez stepped up. Matthew Lopez, by the way, retired now. So it's one of those things where it was by design. But with this fight, it's a bit risky, and I get it because Cody has to fight guys like this if he wants to get a title shot. I don't think you could justify it off of just the Sunset win, although they were willing to give him the flyweight title shot, which speaks to sort of the politics of this industry. But this is a dangerous fight. It reminds me a bit of the Munoz fight. I remember when he lost to Dillashaw and they matched him up with Pedro Munoz. I was like, that's not a good idea because what's the game there, right? Munoz not a big name, and Munoz is good everywhere. And what happened? He got knocked out. And I actually picked Munoz in that fight because I thought you're fighting a guy who's fresh and hungry and is not had an opportunity like this, and you're fighting a guy in Cody who probably thought it was a layup. And what happened? He got knocked out. So I'm with you there. I think Cody does turn this into a firefight. And I think while he does have more power than Rob, I think Rob's technique will get the better of Cody in this fight, where he'll pick his shots a little bit better, find that opening. And I could see a situation where he stumbles Cody and then goes for the kill. I don't think you'll see like a one-punch knockout there from Rob Font to get it done, but I could see him wobbling Cody and then just sort of, laying that fire down and just, getting the TKO finish. So I'm with you as well. Again, I do have to point out, like you mentioned, is the takedowns could be a bit interesting. Alpha male known for their wrestling, but Garbrandt doesn't seem to do that. So I'm banking on the fact that the old Cody's going to show up in a bad way and go into a brawl with Rob Font and get knocked out. So that's going to be my pick is Rob Font. Before we move away from this and we'll get to questions again, if you guys have questions, just post them in the chat here. We'll get to them as soon as we can. The implications of this, and I did mention that earlier. So let's assume that Alja's going to be out. Let's assume they don't do an interim title. I don't mind if they do in this case because you're out for 9 months. It's a long time to hold up a division. So let's assume they don't. Let's assume Jan is going to fight, Aljo, so he's at the top. I think there could be a possibility of, the Dillashaw-Sandhagen winner fighting the winner of this fight, potentially, if they need to keep active or whatever, especially if Garbrandt wins and Dillashaw wins. I mean, they'll run that back again if they can. It's 2 huge names in the division. If Sandhagen and Font win, maybe they go that route, but not exactly like a big money fight, like big name fight in that division as well. So it'll be really interesting. Like, I honestly don't know. Maybe they do something where they throw in an interim title, or maybe they do give Jan someone else to keep him active. I don't know what route they decide to go. But kind of what I'm getting at here, John, is that keep an eye on this fight because this could, especially if Cody ends up pulling this one off, it could get very interesting in terms of the title picture because the UFC, they'll pull a fast one. They'll, give someone a shot that maybe you weren't thinking of. Maybe they'll do like how we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Nate Diaz fighting Leon Edwards. Like that was totally out of left field. There could be something there at play with this fight as well. But either way, very important fight for the division, and glad they put it together. And I like the timing of this too, with it being very close to Garbrandt and Dillashaw and Sandhagen. I'm losing my mind here. So there you go. Let's get to our first question here. James